Do you experience food cravings and you want to beat them for good? Well, welcome. You're in the right place. I'm Dr. Patricia Mills, and today on the Wild Wisdom Show, we're going to be talking about 3 reasons why women have stronger sweet cravings than men and 4 tips to overcome them for good using evidence based root cause solutions. Now, this was inspired by a study that I came across. As a medical doctor, I read a lot of studies, and this one really captured my attention. And it's titled Changes in Food Cravings and Eating Behavior After a Dietary Carbohydrate Restriction Intervention Trial. And if you're listening to this on my podcast, pop over to YouTube. My channel will have the references for the studies in the banners in the video. And essentially, the researchers in the study said that the reason that they did this study was because they have noticed that in many studies, low-fat diets tend to not reduce weight as much as low carbohydrate diets. So, in other words, it's more effective to improve your weight control using a low carb diet than a low fat diet, which is really contrary to long-term, conventional nutritional guidance. So they looked at men and women, and they did a lower carbohydrate diet. So essentially, looking at the total energy intake over the day, only 14% was carbohydrates, 58% was fat, 28% protein, and this was just for 4 weeks. And essentially, what that meant is that both men and women had to reduce simple carbohydrate foods like white bread, pasta, rice, pastries, and in particular, any kind of sugary snack. And the results were actually very impressive because this was the first time that they showed that perhaps the reason that the weight loss occurs over time with the lower carbohydrate diets is that they detected in these participants reduced food cravings. The participants had more dietary restraint with decreased disinhibition eating. So, eating of foods, even though you know you shouldn't eat it, that disinhibition that some people experience, that was decreased, and also decreased hunger. Even though the fat content was higher, they were seeing these behavioral changes. But what they found very interesting, and what I found very interesting, is that women had a greater decrease in sweet cravings than men when they went on this lower carbohydrate diet. Now, why would men and women experience these results in terms of reduced food cravings, more dietary restraint, decreased disinhibition and hunger? Well, some of the reasons are for the better blood sugar control, which we're going to get into, which leads to better insulin hormone balance and decrease activation of brain reward centers. So when we eat sweet foods, it's not just about the calories, it's about how even the taste on the tongue activates the brain, and the brain reward centers are involved in processes like addiction. So we can even become addicted to the sweet taste. So that's one of the reasons why perhaps we're seeing that even with artificial sweeteners, over time, people can still gain weight because although it's a low calorie alternative, it's still activating the sweet taste and rewarding those brain centers and still triggering and fueling the overall addiction. So that's why men and women experience benefits. But let's get into the 3 reasons why women experience better results than men. And thank you for everyone who is joining me today. And thank you, Shay, for saying respect you always. I much appreciate your comments there. Thank you so much for joining and sharing that. Okay, so reason number 1, why women will experience better results with reducing sugar in the diet, simple sugars in the diet, than men. Reason number 1 is hormone fluctuations. So particularly when we're still menstruating, during our menstrual cycle, we will experience changes in our hormones that affect our hunger, our cravings, and how our body metabolizes carbohydrates over the month. So, for example, as our estrogen and serotonin drop just before menstruation, this can trigger an increase in cravings for sweets or comfort foods. That's a very common experience that women have when they're still menstruating. Now, when women reduce their intake of simple carbohydrates, they stabilize their blood sugar levels, which then reduces the intensity of these hormonal driven cravings. So, basically, what that means is that when we eat a simple carbohydrate food like the pastry, like the pasta, like the white bread, like the sugary foods, that's the treats and the sweets, essentially that causes a big spike in the blood sugar level. So if I were to monitor my blood sugar using a continuous glucose monitor or a finger prick glucometer that diabetics use, for example, I would see real time that after eating, let's say, a chocolate bar or a pastry, my blood sugar level would go up very fast and very high. And that would cause my body to produce the hormone insulin. And insulin's job, one of the many jobs that insulin has, is to tell all the tissues in the body that blood sugar, the sugar in the blood is high. Please open up and let the sugar come in, the glucose come in, so that it can be used for energy. So, what happens is a big blood sugar spike will cause a big spike in insulin hormone production, which will cause a sudden rush of sugar into the tissues. The blood sugar levels will suddenly drop, also very suddenly and very quickly. And people experience a very low blood sugar after that. And sometimes it's not so much that it's even extremely low, like hypoglycemia, but it's low enough that people will feel dips in their energy, will feel a desire to eat again because the body's trying to regulate their blood sugar and keep it within a Goldilocks zone of not too high and not too low. But if you then, in that low blood sugar, low glucose state, reach for another simple carb, another sugary treat, another pastry, and so on, then you're back on that blood sugar roller coaster of too high blood sugar, too much insulin, too low blood sugar. And then the craving strikes again, the low energy, the irritable mood, all those things can happen when your blood sugar drops too low. So if you are regulating how much simple carbohydrates you are taking, even as your hormones are fluctuating through the month, you will experience better stability in those cravings and in those mood and energy fluctuations through the month. So we can experience better results as a result of needing more stability due to those hormone fluctuations, whereas men don't have that fluctuation in their hormones from day to day through the month. So they're more likely to be able to stabilize themselves from day to day. So that's reason number one. Reason number two has to do with the sensitivity to the insulin hormone. So, what's interesting is that studies are suggesting that women are more sensitive to insulin fluctuations compared to men. So, when that blood sugar goes high and when insulin is made, our body is more sensitive to it. So, it'll react differently to the insulin compared to men. And that could mean that we get even more blood sugar rushing into the cells and even more of a blood sugar drop, for example, to accompany those blood sugar spikes. So we're going to be more likely to experience the lows of the blood sugar events, which generally are experienced as food cravings, hunger, irritability, low mood, low energy. So that's reason number two. The studies are suggesting that we are genetically different in that respect, in how we respond to that insulin hormone production in response to the simple carbohydrate production. Now, reason number three have to do with stress and emotional eating. And I find that this is absolutely amazing because this study also was very eye-opening for me. So here's another study called Stress May Add Bite to Appetite in Women, a laboratory study of stress-induced cortisol and eating behavior. So they actually took women and studied their response to stress and their desire to eat and measured things like the stress hormone cortisol. And what they found was that women are more prone to stress induced eating. You could call it stress induced, emotional eating, trauma eating. But essentially, when we experience states of higher stress, we're more likely to opt for sugary or high carbohydrate foods as a way to cope. And it seems like this behavior is driven by the stress hormone cortisol. So, hormones are messengers in the body that, once released, travel through the blood, go into the tissues, and tell us what to do. And the stress hormone cortisol has many effects throughout the body, including the brain, and it seems to regulate our desire and appetite for eating. So we need to pay attention to the fact that as women, we need to even more so, look into methods to cope with our stress, because while we can't avoid stress, we can improve our perception of stress and our response to stress. And what they found was that when we are stressed out and we reach for foods, we tend to reach for those simple carbohydrates because they do offer a quick source of energy and a temporary boost in mood. Because when that blood sugar spikes high, that stimulates those reward centers in the brain. Remember that we were talking about? And so that will temporarily make us feel better. But then the subsequent crash in the blood sugar, as discussed, will affect our mood negatively and lead to that food cravings and hunger, low mood, irritability, and so on. And then you get back onto that roller coaster again of the highs and the lows. So, you know how some people say, well, I do intuitive eating, I eat what makes me feel good. This may not necessarily be good way to eat in when you are experiencing stress, because you may be reaching for foods that make you temporarily feel good, but in the long term, they're sabotaging your health. And by reducing the simple carbohydrates, women can reduce the blood sugar roller coaster, prevent that roller coaster that exacerbates the stress related cravings. Because when your blood sugar drops too low, that in of itself is a physical stress on the body, which will also cause your body to release more cortisol, which is not what we want. So we would get better emotional regulation and fewer urges to reach for sweets if we reduce those simple carbohydrates. So taking all of these three reasons as to why women experience more food cravings than men, in particular, have improved sweet cravings when reducing simple carbohydrates in the diet, here are 4 tips to break the cycle so that you can experience lasting results in terms of controlling your food cravings and, in particular, your sweet cravings. So, tip number 1 is to choose complex carbohydrates. So, there are 3 different kinds of carbohydrates. One kind is the simple sugars, so the kind that you do find in your pastries and your sweet treats, and sometimes even hidden in products like certain breads have a lot of added sugars, gluten-free products, dairy-free products, low-fat products often have added simple sugars to improve the taste, which is great for the taste buds, but not good for your hormone balance and your food cravings. And so complex carbohydrates are things like whole grains, vegetables, beans. So those kinds of foods provide you with carbohydrates, but they don't trigger that high blood sugar response, which then triggers the insulin response. So adding a vegetable starter to every meal, so a salad or cooked vegetables, adding them before every meal has been shown to improve your blood sugar response to that meal. So, a very powerful way to improve your blood sugar regulation and thus improve your food cravings and sweet cravings. Tip number 2 is to increase the amount of protein and healthy fats in your diet. As you saw in the study, the women and the men were consuming a very good amounts of healthy fats and protein. So, what are healthy fats? So, healthy fats come from whole foods such as olive oil, avocado, and the avocado oil. Some amount of animal fat can be healthy, not overdoing it, but also not underdoing it, because we do need some of those fats to do things like build our brain, build our nervous system, build our tissues, build our hormones. Eggs, for example, are a good source of healthy fats. Again, making sure you never overdo any one thing. Even if you drink too much water, it's unhealthy. So staying within the Goldilocks range, but recognizing that healthy fats from things like nuts and seeds also can be very beneficial for the body. So the healthy fats and then the protein, depending on if you're omnivorous or vegan or vegetarian, you're going to be reaching for some really great sources of protein, because we know that protein and healthy fats also help improve our blood sugar response to every meal. So making sure that your breakfast, for example, has enough healthy protein and healthy fats to it. We tend to start our day off with a sweet breakfast. Switching to a savory breakfast could be the ticket to improving your food cravings for the rest of the day. Tip number 3 is to stay hydrated. Sometimes we are thirsty and our body gives us a thirst cue, but we mistake it for a hunger cue when we're actually simply thirsty. So making sure that before breakfast, in between breakfast and lunch, in between lunch and dinner, we are hydrating very, very well, making sure we hit that 2.5 to 3 liters of water a day, ideally mineralized. to make sure that we are hitting our hydration and decreasing those, that food craving that is actually a water craving. And tip number four is mindful eating. Really pay attention to the next time that you sit down to eat any meal. How much are you actually paying attention to that meal? For the amount of time that we spend obsessing over food, it's amazing how little we spend actually paying attention to our food and enjoying the experience of eating. So, taking slow bites, chewing very well, savoring the taste, enjoying the textures, looking at your meal, enjoying the look of it. It's going to be beautiful with those colorful vegetables added in. And that experience should take you more than just a few minutes, ideally 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even longer. Sitting down to eat, not eating on the go, standing, walking, driving. All of those things will allow your brain to appreciate the experience of eating so that it's less likely to be asking for food later because it will have had an enjoyable experience of eating just recently with your last meal. So I really recommend working on this. This is something that I'm always teaching my kids because they tend to just scarf down their food, is to slow down, chew well, taste, enjoy, savor, so that you can remember that with pleasure. And every eating experience will be a pleasurable experience with your meals and your snacks. So mindful eating can be very, very useful. Now, the take home message here is that reducing the intake of simple carbohydrates is an effective evidence based strategy for reducing food cravings, especially for sweets. And while both men and women benefit from this approach, women often experience a more pronounced improvement in their sweet cravings due to these hormonal fluctuations or insulin sensitivity and the impact of stress on cravings. So while these can be, we can look at them as negative things, reasons why we tend to eat sweets more, we can also look at it as a positive thing in the sense that we will respond better to reducing sweets in our diet than men do. And by stabilizing our blood sugar levels and adopting a balanced diet, women can break free from the cycle of cravings and enjoy more consistent energy and well being. Now, if you want to learn how to eat for hormone health and gut health, I really encourage you to look at the caption in my YouTube video, which you'll find below. You're going to need to click on the Read More tab to expand the caption, and you're going to see the link there. There's going to be lots of additional links and resources. One of them is my video on how to eat for gut and hormone health. It's packed full of strategies on the specifics of how to build a healthy plate and healthy meals and healthy snacks. And also, I have a link for my food cravings playlist because there are physical and emotional reasons for food cravings. And we often have to do multiple things, not just one thing, but many things to tackle the root causes of our food cravings for the lasting results. So I hope you found this useful. If you did, please share, subscribe. Sharing is caring, and subscribing is the best way to support this Wild Wisdom show. I look forward to seeing you next time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, or night, depending on when you catch this. Goodbye.